You ever feel your heartbeat in your teeth? It's a hollow, thudding ache that shifts your focus inward until every nerve in your jaw aches with anticipation. That's exactly what happened the moment Karina Ellison slid the HR document across the conference table, her fingers barely grazing the paper's edge before she snapped it into place like a gavel striking down a verdict. I watched the heads of operations swivel in unison, their eyes widening as they recognized the stark, typewritten ultimatum puppied beneath the fluorescent glare. Accept the 60% pay cut, or I'll find someone who will. Silence roared in that room, a vacuum sucking the oxygen from my lungs. My pulse drummed in my molars, but somehow I managed not to flinch. Her words came out cold and measured, each syllable a calculated blow delivered in front of the entire staff. Her kingdom. Cold, public, humiliating. Karina's voice never wavered, never dipped into hesitation. She didn't need to. This was her power move, a demonstration of everything she'd built: respect, fear, authority. Yet they didn't know that I was her husband. Not officially. That fact was part of her design: control behind closed doors, invisibility in public. I'd watched her sculpt our shared world around my absence, turning me into a ghost at our own dinner table, and there she was, doing it again. I kept my face neutral, my posture relaxed, though beneath the surface I was raw with outrage. My mind raced through every memory: late nights drafting our first client proposal, the triumph when we closed that Series A round, the way we used to steal kisses in the stairwell before deadlines swallowed us whole. Back then, we were equals, partners. Now, here I stood as collateral, evidence of her ruthless ascent. When her gaze flicked to me, calm, imperious, I responded with a measured, "I'll need 24 hours to consider." My tone held just enough restraint to mask the tsunami inside. Every eye in the room bore into me, assessing, waiting for a sign of weakness. They didn't understand. None of them knew I'd once been her confidant, her co-conspirator in every late-night brainstorming session. They saw a colleague, maybe an underperforming executive whose time had passed. They didn't see the husband she dismantled piece by piece, the man who had supported her climb to the top while she sharpened her claws. But now, as I watched my words echo against the glass walls, I felt a quiet shift inside, the cracking of something I thought was unbreakable. Something in me broke in that moment, too. Karina's lips twitched, almost a smile. She stood, smoothing the lapels of her tailored blazer, and announced the meeting was adjourned. Around me, chairs scraped back, and a low murmur rippled through the room as colleagues gathered their briefcases and coffee cups. I didn't move. I watched them file past, their conversations hushed, as if they were afraid to disturb the moment's aftermath. Their shocked glances cut sharper than any blade. I allowed myself a slow breath before packing my laptop and notes, every motion deliberate, like a man who wants to show he still controls his own destiny, even if only in that small gesture. When I finally stepped out into the hallway, the corridor lights felt harsh and accusing. I closed my eyes for a split second and pictured Lucas, our 11-year-old, asleep in his room, blissfully unaware that his father was being publicly castrated in the name of corporate strategy. There was anger, yes, but beneath it was a deeper tremor of betrayal, an ache for the life we once shared, for the partnership I believed we had. Yet I knew that path had closed the moment she chose to humiliate me in front of people who would never care if I existed or not. I descended the elevator, pressing the lobby button with an almost violent snap, and as the doors opened, I realized I couldn't go home, not yet. I wasn't ready to face her tonight, to pretend everything was normal over dinner. I ducked into the stairwell instead, my footsteps echoing on concrete, and leaned against the cool wall. My fingers itched for my phone, but I resisted. Instead, I focused on steadying my breath, grounding myself in the moment. I replayed her words, the way she looked at me with that flicker of triumph in her eyes. I'll find someone who will. Someone who would take my place, who would be grateful for scraps. But that wasn't me anymore. The man who sat in that boardroom didn't tremble under her gaze. He didn't cower. He met her challenge with a request for time, a luxury she rarely afforded herself or anyone else. In that request, I felt the spark of something else: hope. Not hope for reconciliation, but hope for escape and reinvention. I pressed my back to the wall, closed my eyes, and made a decision to answer her ultimatum not with defeat, but with defiance. I straightened up, squared my shoulders, and stepped out of the stairwell into the quiet hum of the parking garage. The cool air hit me like a shock, and I inhaled, tasting freedom for the first time in years. I would give her 24 hours. I would consider her cut, her terms, her power, but I would also consider my own options. And when I re-entered that glass fortress tomorrow, I wouldn't be the same man who walked out tonight. Something had shattered alongside my composure, but what emerged was stronger, a conviction that there was a life beyond her empire, and I intended to build it on my own terms. In that dark garage, with the echo of my footsteps fading, I touched my thumb to my teeth, feeling the rapid pulse beneath. Yes, I still felt my heartbeat there, but it no longer held fear. It held determination. I had 24 hours to choose. And I was going to choose me. We were just two names on a startup's payroll back then, Karina and me, young, hungry, and unaware of how ambition can rot the foundation it's built on. Silver Systems didn't have glossy logos or multi-million-dollar contracts at the time. Just a vision and a loft office above a bakery that made the whole place smell like sourdough and dreams. We were a ragtag bunch, chasing cloud infrastructure innovation like it was oxygen, and somehow in the middle of the chaos, we found each other. It started as late-night burrito runs, then turned into stolen kisses by the printer, and before I knew it, we were co-writing code, goals, and a life. Karina was fire, sharp, commanding, impossible to ignore. She saw ladders everywhere and climbed them 2 rungs at a time. I admired that at first. I encouraged it, supported her moves, took notes during pitch rehearsals, edited her presentations, even let her practice telling off underperforming engineers on me just so she'd sound fierce but fair. I wanted her to rise. I never realized she was training herself to rise alone. When she got promoted to VP of HR, I celebrated like it was my own win. She had presence in meetings, command over a room, and I found my niche in strategic partnerships. Quiet work, but critical. I built our client list from nothing: cold calls, trade shows, chasing leads that didn't want to be chased. I landed contracts that floated payroll during tight months, established relationships that the board would later call foundational to our scale. But I wasn't flashy about it. I wasn't on magazine panels or featured in Forbes' Next 100. I didn't need that. Karina did. She loved the spotlight, the applause, the LinkedIn reposts that called her visionary and disruptive. I was content with peace. She craved clout. And somewhere along the way, she stopped seeing us as partners and started seeing me as a prop, a placeholder, a man behind the curtain. We moved into a townhome in Rosegate once bonuses started to roll in. I remember the first night there, standing in the kitchen while Lucas napped upstairs, and she walked in wearing her silver-branded fleece, eyes sparkling from a company-wide presentation she'd just delivered. "We're building something huge," she whispered, arms wrapping around my waist. Together. I believed her. Foolishly. Because even then, the cracks had begun. She didn't ask how my meetings went anymore. She missed dinner twice a week for executive strategy calls and slowly replaced our shared calendar with her own. Our conversations drifted from personal to professional and then stopped altogether. At work, she stopped looking at me like I was her person. She looked at me like an asset, useful, but expendable. I should have spoken up. Should have pulled the ripcord when I started noticing the small humiliations, the time she corrected my report in front of the junior staff instead of waiting till we got home, or when she forgot to loop me in on a major contract negotiation even though the client had been mine. But I didn't. I told myself it was temporary, that the pressure would ease, that she'd remember we were on the same team. That boardroom meeting proved otherwise. After she slid that document across the table, with its ice-cold demand for a 60% pay cut and a threat of replacement, I replayed every compromise I'd ever made for her, every sacrifice that now sat neatly buried under her empire. This wasn't a moment of miscommunication. This was who she had become, and who she expected me to become: silent, compliant, replaceable. I drove home that day on autopilot, gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary, the taste of humiliation still sour in my mouth. Our neighborhood looked too pristine, too polished for what I was feeling, like reality refused to match the storm inside me. I pulled into the driveway and just sat there for a moment, engine idling, watching the soft glow of our living room lamp filter through the blinds. When I stepped inside, Lucas was on the floor building a Lego version of something that looked like Silver's office. He looked up and smiled. "Mom said you were in a big meeting." He didn't know. He couldn't. And that innocence punched me harder than anything she'd said. Karina was in the kitchen, heating something in the microwave. She didn't turn around. "Hey," she said, casual. like she hadn't tried to publicly amputate my career just a few hours earlier. I wanted to shout, to demand an explanation. But instead, I stared at her back, at the way she moved with such certainty, like her world was untouched by the damage she left in mine. "You ambushed me today," I said finally. She paused. "Barely." Then she turned, arms crossed. "It wasn't personal. It was a strategic decision. You did it in front of them," I said, voice low. "Their staff." "Not family," she replied, coolly. "They don't know we're married. They don't need to." I blinked. "You think that makes it better?" She shrugged. "I made a call. It's not about you." And that's when I knew. It wasn't about me, not anymore. Not for a long time. I had been riding shotgun in a car she was driving straight off a cliff, and I'd been too loyal to jump out. I walked upstairs, past Lucas's drawings taped to the wall, past our wedding photo that still hung crooked on the hallway frame. I stood in our bedroom for a long time, looking at the life we built. The life she broke, one calculated decision at a time. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched the ceiling shift from shadow to sunlight and felt the weight of something final settle into my bones. I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. By morning, I wasn't the man who used to quietly protect her legacy. I was the man she underestimated. And I was done waiting for her to remember what we built. I was going to build something better. Without her. I couldn't stop replaying the scene. Karina's voice sharp, cold, like a blade across the back of my neck. The way the others looked at me as she did it, some with pity, some with silent relief that they weren't the target. The tap of her pen after the ultimatum. The stillness in the room as I said I needed 24 hours. And now, alone in my car, I sat parked outside our home with the engine off, fingers still gripping the wheel like I was waiting for something to crash. The house was dark except for the small porch light that flickered every few seconds, casting shadows across the front yard like ghosts pacing the grass. I didn't move. I stared at the windshield, my reflection faint in the glass. I didn't know who I saw anymore. Husband, father, employee, target. And now, maybe something else entirely, something I hadn't felt in a long time, unshackled. Humiliation has a strange way of stripping things clean. You stop making excuses. You stop lying to yourself. You see things plain. Eventually, I stepped out and quietly made my way into the house. Lucas was asleep, his door cracked open just enough for the glow of his nightlight to seep through. I paused, peeking inside. He had fallen asleep with a drawing clutched in one hand, crayons scattered across his bed. I stepped in softly, eased the paper from his fingers. It was a family drawing, him in the center, Karina on the right, our dog that died 2 years ago on the left. Me? I wasn't there. Just a smudge where another figure might have gone, erased with a careless pink thumb. Maybe I'd missed too many breakfasts. Too many games. Maybe I'd made myself invisible. Or maybe I'd been made that way. I tucked the sheet on his nightstand and walked to my office downstairs. The walls were still lined with client folders, pitch decks, hand-drawn org charts from when Silvera was nothing more than a desperate group of tech optimists trying to outthink Amazon. I'd built our strategic arm from scratch. Courted clients no one else could get close to. Held on to relationships like they were rope bridges. And now? A 60% pay cut for the man who brought in a third of the company's recurring revenue. Loyalty was a currency I spent far too generously. I opened my laptop. The company org chart still sat open in a pinned tab from earlier that afternoon. My name, now attached to a strange new title, Special Consultant. It felt like a severance in disguise. I stared at it for a full minute before closing the tab. Then I opened a new one and typed 4 words, Kortenix Systems career page. Kortenix. The name had always lingered like a whisper in Silvera's corridors. Our top competitor. Sleeker, louder, better funded. They tried poaching me 3 times before, always dangling better pay, better titles, faster tracks. And I turned them down each time for loyalty, for principle, for Karina. Never again. I bypassed their careers page and pulled up my contacts instead. Jared Ortega. The name brought back a flood of memories. He'd been an intern on my team a decade ago, fresh out of grad school with more ideas than tact. I mentored him, taught him how to pitch without sounding like he was begging, showed him how to read a room. We'd lost touch when he left for Kortenix 5 years back. Now he was VP of Strategic Growth. I stared at his name for a beat longer. My mouse hovered over a message. I clicked. Jared. Long time. Hope you're well. I'd like to discuss something important. Are you available this week for a quick conversation? I hit send. Closed the tab. and stared into the quiet darkness. For minutes later, I heard the ping. I leaned forward and opened it. Marcus. Damn, I hoped this day would come. You free tomorrow morning? Early. I stared at the message. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. For the first time in a long time, I smiled. Something real, not rehearsed or diplomatic. Name the place, I replied. We settled on Rosegate Diner. 6:30 a.m. That was Jared, early, eager, efficient. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled, my fingers tingling with a sensation I hadn't felt in over a year. Possibility. Not in a vague, someday kind of way. But right now, like someone had just cracked open the window in a room where I'd been suffocating. Down the hall, I heard the muffled clatter of Karina moving in the kitchen, probably preparing her overnight oats or one of her nutrient smoothies with all the silent confidence of someone who had never been challenged. I didn't go to her. I didn't say a word. I powered down my laptop and went upstairs, stepping past the photos on the wall, vacations, awards dinners, Lucas's first birthday party. All curated moments, all frozen in time. In our bedroom, Karina was already in bed, a book on her lap. She looked up but said nothing, just returned to her reading like I was a coat on a rack, something she kept around but no longer noticed. I changed in silence, slid into bed without brushing against her, stared at the ceiling, heart still echoing against my ribs. She didn't ask about the meeting. She didn't ask how I felt. She never did. And tomorrow, I would meet with the man she once laughed off as junior talent. I would sit across from someone who remembered what I taught him, not just about business, but about loyalty and grit. And I would listen to what he had to offer, not out of desperation, but with intent. I'd given Silvera everything. I gave her everything. Now, it was time to give something back to myself. Across the bridge, a new chapter was waiting. And this time, I would walk in with both eyes open. The Rosegate Diner hadn't changed since I'd last been there 5 years ago. Same cracked leather booths, same flickering neon sign above the counter, and the same waitress, Gloria, who moved like she had owned the place long before the actual owner ever signed a lease. It was the kind of place people came to disappear into routine. But that morning, before the sun even touched the rooftops, I wasn't here for routine. I was here to end one chapter and begin another. Jared was already seated when I walked in, grinning like a man who'd just found a winning lottery ticket. He stood up to hug me. Marcus, he said, slapping me on the back. I swear, I've pictured this moment more times than I'd admit to HR. I chuckled, easing into the seat across from him. I see Courtnix hasn't taken the charm out of you. Just polished it, he said, then signaled to Gloria without even glancing at the menu. Coffee for both. Black, right? Some things never changed. I leaned back, studied him a little. He'd filled out, his jaw sharper, his suit better tailored, his voice steadier. He looked like a man who finally owned the rooms he used to sneak into. And yet there was still that hint of awe in his eyes when he spoke to me, like I was the guy who pulled him out of his own shadow. Maybe I had. But today, I wasn't his mentor. Today, we were equals. So, I said, folding my hands. Let's talk. Jared didn't waste time. He pulled out a manila folder and slid it across the table. The irony wasn't lost on me. 2 days ago, my wife had done the same thing, with threats tucked behind every sentence. But this folder? It hummed with opportunity. Senior Director of Strategic Growth, he said. 180 base. 30% bonus potential. Full benefits. Signing bonus that'll make you forget you ever got downgraded to consultant. And more importantly, he leaned in, lowering his voice. We'll fast-track you to VP in 6 months, maybe less, if even half your former clients follow you. I blinked. That's generous. No, he replied. That's overdue. I opened the folder. Neatly printed offer letter, compensation package, NDAs, standard onboarding forms. But what caught my eye wasn't what was in the folder, it was what wasn't. No non-compete clause, I said aloud. Jared nodded. We don't need it. You're not just a name on a resume. You're the reason deals close. People trust you. And trust doesn't come with an expiration date. I sipped my coffee, letting the words settle. I meant in my current contract, I clarified. Silvera. Karina had it removed last year. Said it would give me more flexible. He raised an eyebrow. You serious? I pulled out my phone, tapped through a few PDFs, and turned it toward him. Page 11. No non-compete. No client solicitation clause. No IP restrictions. Jared whistled low. She thought you'd never leave. She was wrong. He tapped the table, smirking. You know they'll try to drag you through the mud anyway. I nodded. Let them. I've bled for that company. The files I built, the trust one earned, the clients I signed, they weren't handed to me. They weren't gifted because I married into power. I earned them, and I won't lift a finger to steal a single one. You won't need to, he said. They'll call you. They'll ask where you are. They'll follow because they want to, not because you ask. The waitress brought our food. I hadn't even realized I was hungry until the smell of eggs and toast hit me. Jared took a bite, then pointed at the folder. So? You in? I didn't answer right away. I picked up the pin he'd placed neatly beside the packet. It felt heavy in my hand, not just from the metal, but from what it symbolized. Not revenge, not ego, but self-respect. After being buried in Karina's shadow, after being turned into a convenient pawn in her strategic ambitions, here was a chance to step back into the light. I signed. Jared raised his coffee mug. To new beginnings. To freedom, I said. We ate in silence after that, the kind that only exists between people who understand the gravity of a moment. As we left the diner, the sky had begun to brighten, soft streaks of orange cutting through the dawn. I climbed into my car, folder in hand, and sat there for a long moment. Not because I was unsure, but because I felt weightless. Like the tension I'd been carrying in my chest for the past 2 years had finally lifted. When I got home, the house was quiet. Karina's car was gone, early meeting, no doubt. She didn't ask where I'd gone, didn't check to see if I came home last night, didn't seem to care that we hadn't spoken since the HR ambush. I went to my office, closed the door, and pulled up the Silver Employee Handbook, the one I'd helped write. It was all still there, pages of policies, clauses, protocols. But none of it applied to me anymore. I was untethered. Still, I scanned through my own employment agreement again, just to be sure. No non-compete. No restrictions on where I worked next. Karina had assumed I'd be loyal until the end. She'd never imagined I'd have the spine to walk away, much less the leverage to land somewhere stronger. She'd unhooked my leash thinking I wouldn't move without her. Her mistake. I printed my resignation letter that night. Straightforward. Professional. No bitterness on the page, but every sentence dripped with clarity. Tomorrow, I would walk into her glass-walled office wearing the same suit I wore when we pitched Silver to its first investor. Black, crisp, poised. And this time, I wouldn't be the one begging for her approval. I'd be the one holding the final word. I wore the suit with intention. Blackwell, tailored. The one I hadn't touched in years but never had the heart to get rid of. The one I wore when Karina and I pitched Silver to the angel investors who first gave us a shot. Back then, she had held my hand under the conference table, squeezing twice every time she got nervous. Now, she wouldn't even meet my eyes across the dinner table. The irony was rich. I adjusted my cufflinks in the mirror, took a long breath, and walked out the door. The drive to Silver was quiet. Not a single song felt right, so I let the silence ride with me. I passed the same coffee shop where Karina and I used to split a bagel on early mornings. She always took the top half with the extra sesame seeds. These days, she barely spoke before leaving for the gym or another strategy call. Somewhere between ambition and titles, we stopped being a team. When I stepped into the building, I nodded at reception, then rode the elevator to the executive floor. My heart didn't race. No tremble in my hands. Just a strange calm, like I was walking into a funeral I'd already grieved. The doors opened and there she was, behind the glass wall of her office, back straight, pen in hand, dissecting some document like it owed her an apology. I knocked once. She looked up, surprised to see me. "Marcus," she said flatly. "I thought you were taking the day." "I'm here to make a decision," I replied, stepping inside and closing the door behind me. She gestured without standing. "Go ahead." I placed the resignation letter on her desk. No preamble, no apology, just the truth in 12-point calibri. She didn't reach for it, just stared at it like it might explode. Then she leaned back in her chair, arms crossing slowly. "You're making a mistake," she said. "No," I replied. "I'm making a choice." There was a flicker behind her eyes. Surprise, maybe, or something closer to irritation. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by me. "You're walking away from 14 years, she said. I nodded. 14 years where I made this company millions. 14 years where I stayed loyal even when it cost me time with my son, cost me my peace. Her tone hardened. "You're not going to find another role in this market at your level. Not with your compensation expectations. Not with this economy. I smiled then. Just a little. Actually, I already have. That made her blink. Just for a second. The mask cracked. Where? Courtnix, I said. Calm. Direct. And there it was, the moment she lost control. Her body went rigid. Her fingers curled around the edge of the desk like she was holding onto the ground beneath her. Courtnix, she repeated, as if the name itself was a betrayal. They offered what I'm worth. What I should have been worth here. Her voice dropped. You do realize we'll sue. I reached into my leather folder and dropped the Courtnix offer letter beside my resignation. No non-compete. No IP conflicts. No client solicitation. You forgot to protect the one person you thought would never leave. The silence was heavy. She flipped through the Courtnix contract, her eyes scanning the terms. I watched her lips press into a thin line. The woman who once used to say, "We make a great team," now calculating exactly how she lost a partner, personally and professionally. I removed the non-compete to give you room to grow, she said tightly. No, I replied. You removed it because you thought I'd never use it. Her jaw clenched. I was loyal to a fault, I continued. I passed on offers. Sat through your meetings where I was invisible. Took the back seat so you could shine. I never wanted to be the face. But when you humiliated me in front of your team, our team, you made something very clear. I don't belong here anymore. And I'm done pretending I do. She stood, finally, as if height would help her reclaim authority. This will damage our reputation. No, I said. It will damage yours. For a beat, we stood there in silence. Two people who once built something side by side, now on opposite sides of a war neither of us declared out loud. The room felt colder than I remembered. More clinical. Less hours. I built this company, she said quietly. So did I replied. And now I'm building something else. There was a finality in the way I said it. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. I could tell she wanted to say more, but there was nothing left that could undo what had already been broken. I turned to leave. Marcus, she called just as I reached the door. I paused, hand on the knob. Why now, she asked. Her voice wasn't demanding anymore. It was something closer to human. I looked back at her. The woman who used to dance barefoot in our living room, who once whispered her dreams against my collarbone, who used to believe in us. Because yesterday, I said, I realized I've spent too long being loyal to someone who stopped being loyal to me. Then I opened the door and stepped out. By the time I reached my office, news had already started to ripple through the floor. Devin from legal gave me a long, unreadable look. Maria from finance stood near the coffee machine, eyes glassy. I gave her a nod. She smiled weakly and mouthed, "Thank you." I packed my things in silence. A few folders. My son's crayon drawing of a rocket ship. A coffee mug that said, "Do the work." I left the framed picture of Karina and me at last year's gala in the drawer. That wasn't a memory I needed anymore. HR pinged me before I could head out. We'll coordinate your exit documents, the email said. Please wait for security to escort you per protocol. Security. After all I'd done, after all I gave. This was how it ended. Like a threat. Like a liability. I waited. Calm. Unbothered. I didn't want a scene. I didn't need one. The security guard was polite, almost apologetic. Just protocol, Mr. Ellison, he muttered. I nodded. Of course. As we walked through the corridor, I could feel eyes on me. Colleagues trying to look busy. Screens flickering with pretend work. No one spoke, but everyone watched. And then I stepped through the glass doors of silver one final time. No announcement. No applause. Just quiet shoes on tile and a gust of wind as the doors shut behind me. But I didn't look back. Not once. The air outside Silver's building was different. Not just cooler, but freer, like the kind of breeze that lets you know you've just walked away from a fire and survived. I stood on the steps for a few seconds longer than I needed to, holding the box of my things in one arm, my resignation confirmation envelope in the other. It was strange how light it all felt. After 14 years of loyalty, I expected the weight of regret, the tug of nostalgia. Instead, I felt nothing but clarity. Devin from legal had sent me a one-line Slack message an hour before. Do you want a quiet exit strategy? I declined without hesitation. I didn't need fanfare, but I wasn't going to slink out the back door like I'd been caught stealing office supplies. I wanted them to see me leave, to feel the ripple of it. Maria from finance had been crying. She didn't say much, just hugged me fiercely and whispered. She didn't have to do it like that. She meant Karina. Everyone did. They'd seen her play her hand, wield her power in that conference room not like a leader, but like a tyrant marking her territory. And now that I was gone, they'd be watching her even more closely, waiting to see who'd be next. The security escort wasn't even necessary, but protocol demanded it. For senior staff, they claimed. What they meant was, for those whose exits hurt the bottom line. The guard walked quietly beside me, eyes fixed ahead. When we reached the elevator, he pressed the button, stepped back. I glanced at him. "You draw the short straw?" I asked. He gave a half smile. "You're not the first executive I've walked out, Mr. Ellison, but you're the first one who left with his head held high." I appreciated that more than I thought I would. When the doors opened to the lobby, I stepped out to a hushed room. Receptionists paused mid-call. Interns pretended to scroll through emails they weren't reading. I walked across the marble floors I used to help mop in the early days when we couldn't afford cleaning staff, back when Karina and I shared a desk and a single dream. Now she had an entire corner office, and I had the one thing she couldn't reclaim: my name, my value, and the trust of every client I'd ever worked with. I exited the building into the afternoon sun, slid the box onto the passenger seat of my car, and sat for a long while with the engine off. No calls, no emails, just stillness. Then, almost like clockwork, my phone lit up. First was Sonia Adair from Teltrix Solutions. "Hey Marcus, just heard. Where are you headed?" Then Marcus Doyle from Graywell International. "Tell me you're staying in the industry. We want to talk." A few minutes later, Elaine Winters. The same client who once said she'd never work with anyone but Silvera. "If you're leaving, I'm reconsidering our position. Let's connect soon." I hadn't pitched, hadn't even hinted. And yet here they were, calling, texting, asking where I went. Because it wasn't about the company. It never had been. They were buying me. My judgment. My relationship. The years I spent learning their business inside and out. Karina never understood that. She thought people could be managed like numbers. That loyalty could be drafted into contracts. But real loyalty isn't written down. It's earned. I replied to each one with a simple message: "We'll talk Monday. I'll have something to share." Then I opened a fresh notebook. Wrote 3 words at the top of the page: Courtnix. Day 1. That night, I got home before Lucas did. He had soccer practice, and Karina had volunteered to do the pickup, probably to soften the optics, to paint a picture of domestic unity that hadn't existed in months. I sat at the kitchen table, box beside me, and took out a photo from the top. Me and Lucas at a park 2 years ago. He was holding a popsicle, his mouth stained blue, his hand in mine. I'd forgotten about this one. Karina had taken it. I remembered how she smiled at us then, genuinely. I wondered where that woman had gone. The garage door opened. I heard the car pull in, the telltale sound of Lucas kicking off his cleats before he even got to the door. He burst in a moment later, breathless. "Dad, did you see my goal?" "Not yet," I said, standing up. "But you can show me. I'm home early." His eyes lit up. "You're never home this early." "I will be now." He ran off to get his ball, and I turned just as Karina walked in. She looked tired. Not exhausted, just drained in that permanent way success can sometimes carve into a person. Her eyes flicked to the box on the table. "So it's done," she said. "It is." She nodded. "They'll come after you." I didn't take anything that wasn't mine. No clients solicited. No documents. You built your company on rules. I followed every one. She sighed and leaned against the kitchen counter. "I didn't think you'd actually do it." "I know." There was a long silence between us, filled only by the sound of Lucas kicking the ball against the living room wall and laughing at the rebound. "I never meant to hurt you," she said at last. I met her eyes. "You didn't need to mean it. You just needed to stop seeing me." That was the moment it landed for both of us, that the damage wasn't in one public insult or one pay cut. It had started long ago in all the quiet choices, the diminishing, the dismissals, the absence of kindness when power arrived. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I said, voice even. She nodded once and stepped past me into the living room. I didn't follow. Later that night, after Lucas was asleep, I emailed Jared. All 4 clients reached out. Not because I asked. Because they saw what you saw. He replied 5 minutes later. "Then we begin." And we did. Monday morning hit like a starting pistol. No time for nerves, no time for nostalgia. I sat at my new desk, sleek, minimalist, modern, with a fresh notepad, a full mug of black coffee, and a locked-in determination I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't easing into Courtnix. I was leading. Jared had made it clear the minute I signed. "We're not hiring you to blend in. We're building a new lane for you. That lane began now. At 8:03 a.m., my inbox chimed. Subject, checking in. Marcus, just heard the news. If you're open to a conversation, I'd love to catch up. We've got some flexibility coming up in Q3, and I've always valued your insight. Sonia Dare, Teltrix Solutions. Sonia was old school, sharp as a blade, and twice as unforgiving if you crossed her. She never moved lightly. The fact that she was the first to reach out wasn't an accident. It was a signal. By 8:17 a.m., I had 2 more emails waiting, Marcus Doyle from Graywell and Fiona Lacey from Enduratech. None of them asked directly if I'd poached them. They were too savvy for that. Instead, the messages read like invitations. Where are you landing? We may need a new approach. Let me know where you are. Every word coded in plausible deniability, every sentence humming with interest. And I hadn't made a single call. That was the thing Karina never understood. Business relationships aren't built on discounts or gimmicks. They're built on trust. Trust that's earned in quiet ways. Meeting deadlines without being asked, staying late to walk a client through integration issues, remembering the name of a client's daughter when no one else did. Trust lives in the small details. And now, as the news of my departure rippled through the industry, trust was doing the work for me. I didn't rush to reply. I spent the morning reviewing Cortnix's client portfolios, looking for gaps, missed opportunities, areas where we could outperform Silvera. It wasn't hard to find them. Silvera had become bloated, too many middle managers, too many processes that smothered momentum. I knew because I helped build them. But Cortnix was lean, fast, and ready to move. At 11:20 a.m., Jared stepped into my office, a grin already spreading across his face. Let me guess, he said. They're calling. They're circling, I corrected, tapping my inbox. They'll call by Friday. They'll call today, he said, pulling up a chair. Sonia's on a panel with me next week. She asked if we could grab coffee in advance. I've known her for 8 years. She's not a coffee kind of woman. I nodded, but I wasn't surprised. This wasn't arrogance. It was the slow unfolding of inevitable consequences. Silver thought they owned those accounts. What they owned was access. What I had was loyalty. And that couldn't be bought back. Jared slid a paper onto my desk. List of key accounts we want to target. Most of them are clients you touched at some point, even if indirectly. Take a look. You know them better than we do. I scanned the list. Teltrix, Graywell, Norkin, Xylene, and 3 others I'd helped onboard back in the lean days when Silvera still hosted brainstorming sessions on folding tables. I recognized the names. I remembered the wins. And I remembered how I was never the one invited to the podium when the deals closed. How aggressive are we being? I asked. You tell me, Jared said. We're not stealing. We're simply being open. If they come, we catch. No emails. No pitches. No contact first. Just let the magnet work. And it was already working. At 12:03 p.m., the first call came. My phone buzzed. Elaine Winters. The same Elaine who once told me, to my face, I don't switch vendors. I don't do drama. The woman who once asked Karina to remove me from a Zoom call because she thought executives should know when to exit quietly. I picked up. Elaine, I said. Marcus, she replied, her tone cool but curious. You landed somewhere yet? I have. Cortnix. Yes. There was a pause. Good. I've been waiting for a reason. A reason. That's what I had become, a reason to reevaluate, to reconsider, to realign. We talked for 6 minutes. She asked questions about Cortnix's roadmap, stability, ethics. I answered clearly, honestly, with no attempts to sell her. When we hung up, I didn't press. I didn't follow up. I didn't need to. At 2:12 p.m., Marcus Doyle followed. By 4:47 p.m., I had 6 meetings on the calendar. All requested. None initiated by me. I leaned back in my chair, watching the soft glow of sunset stretch across the Cortnix skyline view, an office without tension, without judgment, without silent warfare tea. When Karina came to pick him up, she paused in the doorway. You're home early, she said. I work somewhere that values balance, I said, not looking up from the drawing Lucas had taped to the fridge. She didn't respond. As they left, Lucas turned back and whispered, Can we hang out again Wednesday? Count on it, I said. I closed the door and stood there for a long moment, the house quiet, the evening light soft and forgiving. I'd spent years thinking that victory was about holding the high ground, staying loyal, waiting to be recognized. But real victory? It was having people remember who you were when you're no longer in the room. And they were remembering now. It was a Thursday night. Late. Lucas had just gone to bed, and I'd finished replying to a last batch of emails, quiet ripples from the growing wave of client shifts. The numbers were speaking for themselves. Kortnick's weekly growth metrics were starting to mirror Silver's losses. Even Jared, usually calm and smooth, was starting to wear a look I hadn't seen before. Hunger. The kind of hunger that came from watching years of waiting finally start to bear fruit. I just set my phone down when it rang, an unknown number, local area code. I stared at the screen for a second before answering. "Marcus Ellison," I said. There was a pause. Then, "Marcus. It's Harlan Royce, the CEO of Silver Systems." I stood without realizing it, one hand bracing the edge of the kitchen island. I hadn't heard his voice in months. Even when I was still with the company, Harlan was one of those appear once a quarter leaders, only visible when there were cameras or crises. Apparently, this was both. "Evening, Harlan," I said evenly. "Didn't expect to hear from you." "I'd like to speak man-to-man," he began, his tone diplomatic, controlled. I could practically hear the legal department sitting behind him, nodding silently. "All right," I replied, walking to the living room window. "I'm listening. This situation with your departure, it's escalating more than we anticipated." "I didn't escalate anything. That's not what I meant." He cleared his throat. "You've built strong relationships over the years, and we recognize that. But the client shifts we've seen recently are the result of trust," I cut in. "Trust you let your head of people publicly destroy." He was quiet for a beat. Then he continued, measured. "We'd like to offer you a revised package. New title, Senior Partner, Equity, Full Reinstatement. We can undo what was done." I almost laughed. Not out of disrespect, but disbelief. The man who once told a boardroom that I was foundational, but not irreplaceable, now wanted to reverse course because he finally understood that foundation didn't mean invisible. It meant essential. "You're too late," I said. "Think about your family," he said softly. I looked down the hallway, where Lucas's nightlight glowed under the doorframe. "I have," I replied. I thought about my son asking why his mother yelled at me in front of the entire staff. I thought about the mornings he saw me leave before sunrise and come back after dark. I thought about the way he stopped drawing me in family portraits because I was always at work. "Marcus, I gave everything to Silvera," I continued. "I built departments from scratch, held clients when your systems were failing, brought in the kinds of contracts that paid for Karina's entire HR restructuring. And when I needed dignity, just dignity, you gave me silence. Until the numbers dropped. We didn't realize. You didn't care," I said, sharper now. "And now that the market's reacting, I'm suddenly valuable again? That's not how it works." There was a long pause on the other end. Then, finally, "Is there anything we can say to make this right?" I looked out the window, watching the streetlights flicker across the pavement. I thought about the peace I'd felt walking into Kortnick's each day. The respect in Jared's voice when he asked for my opinion. The way my calendar finally had room for my son. I thought about the meetings I'd had that week alone. 7 clients already transitioning. For more reviewing proposals. The new team I was mentoring, people who looked at me not as a relic, but as a leader. And I thought about Karina, who hadn't reached out once. Not to apologize. Not to explain. Not even to argue. "You can't make it right," I said. "Because you let it go too far. And the worst part is, you probably still don't understand what you let her do to me. You didn't lose a name. You lost the one person who never asked for the spotlight, but held your brand together when everything else cracked." Another pause. But this one had weight. "I see," he finally said. "No, Harlan. That's the problem. You never did." I ended the call. I stood there in the quiet, the silence thick around me, the finality of that conversation ringing louder than anything he'd said. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. That part had burned away weeks ago. What I felt now was something cleaner. Stronger. Closure. That night, I walked into Lucas's room. He was half awake, curled in a messy tangle of sheets, his mouth slightly open. I sat on the edge of the bed, brushing a hand through his hair. "You won't have to ask me to be home anymore," I whispered. "I'm already here." The next morning, I opened my email and typed one final message to Jared. Subject, full commitment. Harlan called. He offered everything. I turned it down. "Let's move forward." Jared replied 2 minutes later. "Then it's time to grow this thing. Full speed." And we did. 2 months had passed. The skyline outside my Kortnick's office shimmered with late morning sun, the glass panels of neighboring towers casting reflections across my desk. I just wrapped up a call with Graywell International, our third successful transition in 6 weeks, when my assistant knocked gently on the glass. Marcus, there's a visitor. She doesn't have an appointment, but she said you'd want to see her. I didn't need to ask who. I stood, adjusted the cuff of my shirt, and walked out to the reception area. And there she was, Karina. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but in presence. The steel-hard edges she once wore like armor were duller, and the confident tilt of her chin was now tinged with restraint. Her blazer was crisp, her heels sharp as ever, but there was a quiet unease in the way she held her purse close to her body, like it could shield her from what she'd come to face. She didn't smile. Neither did I. Marcus, she said, her voice measured. Karina, I was hoping we could talk. Privately. I nodded once, turned, and led her to my office. The door clicked shut behind us, sealing in a silence thick with everything we hadn't said in months. She glanced around the space, sleek, warm-toned, tastefully modern. A wall of floor-to-ceiling windows bathed the room in natural light, and behind my desk, the Cortinix logo gleamed against matte black. This is nice, she said, forcing something close to polite. Very you. I sat behind my desk and motioned for her to take the seat across from me. She did, folding her hands over her knee. Her eyes darted to the nameplate on my desk. Marcus Ellison, Vice President, Global Client Partnerships. Her jaw tightened. You've turned half the market against me, she said, skipping the preamble. No, I said calmly. You did that yourself when you made a spectacle out of your husband in front of junior staff. I just left. I was doing my job. You were executing a performance, I said. You didn't just cut my salary. You tried to humiliate me. And you made sure they all saw it. She shifted in her chair. I didn't think it would unravel this way. That's the thing, Karina. You didn't think at all. You thought I'd take it like I always did. Quietly. With grace. You forgot I built Silver's backbone while you chased visibility. I never took credit for your work. No, but you never shared it either. She looked down at her hands for a moment, gathering herself. You were always consistent. Predictable. And you needed that. Until you didn't. Silence again. She looked up at me, the edge in her expression softening just slightly. I came because I wanted to understand, she said. Why you let it all go. Us. The company. Everything. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the desk. I didn't let anything go, Karina. I just stopped holding things that were already breaking me. She blinked. I fought for us, I continued. For the company. For every meeting, every deal, every late night that I covered while you climbed. And you, somewhere along the way, stopped seeing me as a partner. I became convenient. Background. Replaceable. I was under pressure, she said quietly. We all were. But pressure reveals character. And yours came out cold. Her gaze drifted toward the window. Do you love what you're doing now? I didn't hesitate. I do. She nodded once, like she already knew the answer. And Lucas? She asked. He sees me now, I said. I'm home. I coach his team. He puts me in his drawings again. That hit her harder than anything else I'd said. You know what he asked me last week? I added. Why didn't Mom ever clap when you came on stage at Career Day? I didn't even know he noticed. But he did. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. No defense. No explanation. You're right, she said finally. I stopped seeing you. Somewhere between my ambition and my control, I just assumed you'd never leave. And I told myself that made me strong. It made you blind. She nodded. Slowly. Then stood. Well, you've made your point. I stood too. I didn't ask you here. I know, she said. But I had to see it for myself. What you became when you stopped standing in my shadow. We locked eyes for a long moment. There was no hatred there. No venom. Just a mutual understanding that something had ended, and it wasn't temporary. You were always meant for more, she whispered. I stepped back. You just didn't want me to have it. She took a shaky breath and walked to the door. As her hand touched the knob, she turned once more. Goodbye, Marcus. Goodbye, Karina. She left without another word. The door clicked shut behind her. I sat back down, the quiet settling around me. But this silence didn't ache. It didn't feel like a void. It felt earned. Peaceful. Right. And outside, the city continued to move, deals waiting, clients calling, my future wide open. She had walked into my office thinking I might look back. But I was already facing forward. A full year had passed. 12 months since I walked out of Silver Systems with a box in my hands and my reputation intact. 12 months since Karina's voice echoed through that glass-walled room. delivering a threat wrapped in corporate language. And now, sitting at the head of a wide walnut conference table in Kortnick's downtown headquarters, I realized something. I hadn't once looked back. Not out of stubbornness. Out of peace. Final numbers from Q2, Jared said, sliding a folder across to me. We're up 27% over last year. That includes the Teltrix account, Graywell, Xylene, and now Enduratech. I opened the folder and let the numbers speak for themselves. Every name in that report had once been a silver client. Every deal was one I had either originated, nurtured, or saved when others had fumbled it. But I hadn't poached a single one. I hadn't needed to. Trust is gravity. It pulls the right people toward you once the mask slips from those they thought they could rely on. Maria now ran our partner analytics division. Devin led our compliance team. Both had followed me from Silvera. Not with bitterness, but with resolve. They saw what I had endured. They saw what Karina did. And when the opportunity came to build something different, something ethical and quietly powerful, they didn't hesitate. Kortnick's hadn't just gained clients. It had gained culture. I closed the folder. Let's keep going. No press. No victory laps. Just results. Jared grinned. You ever gonna let yourself enjoy this? I'm enjoying it, I said. I just don't need to scream about it. Later that evening, I left the office while the sun still hung low over the skyline. My car was already idling in the underground lot, another silent courtesy from the assistant I once doubted I needed. I learned something in the last year. Freedom doesn't always come from revenge. Sometimes, it comes from routine. From walking into a place every day where you're respected, not questioned. From leaving early enough to make it home in time for dinner. Lucas was waiting in the kitchen when I walked in. Soccer cleats on the table, a half-eaten granola bar in his hand, and a grin smeared with peanut butter. Coach Ellison, he declared, we've got practice tomorrow. Wouldn't miss it, I said, ruffling his hair. He was taller now, more confident. And for the first time since the divorce papers had been quietly filed and finalized 6 months ago, I saw how much calmer he was. Less anxious. Less confused. The absence of tension in the house had made room for growth, and both of us. He ran off to get his ball from the yard, and I stepped out to the porch, phone in hand. An alert popped up on my screen. Silver stock down 17% following quarterly loss. HR department undergoing restructuring. There was a picture embedded in the article, Harlan looking stiff behind a podium, his tie slightly crooked, and beside him, an empty chair. Karina had stepped down a few months earlier, citing personal growth goals. Translation: she'd been pushed. The industry wasn't stupid. When 4 major clients walked within 90 days of my resignation, it raised eyebrows. When 2 of her own staff followed me to Kortnick's, it raised questions. When the media caught wind of her HR decisions and the mysterious reclassification of her own husband, it became a liability. And me? I didn't comment. I didn't retaliate. I didn't even post a cryptic LinkedIn update. I just kept building. Because real payback isn't noisy. It's dignified. It's being so focused on what you're creating that you don't have time to burn down what you left behind. Dinner that night was simple: grilled chicken, roasted carrots, and a salad Lucas mostly picked around. We laughed about a joke his coach told, and when he went to bed, I sat by the window with a glass of wine and the soft buzz of contentment settling around me. I thought about everything Karina had once meant to me, everything we tried to build together, and how she had weaponized the very thing we created. But I also thought about what came after. The morning sun through Kortnick's floor-to-ceiling windows. The way Maria teared up during our team retreat when she said, "It's nice to work somewhere that feels human again." The late-night pitch meetings with Jared where we built strategies off instinct, not ego. The emails from clients who said, "We trust you to lead this." Karina's voice was gone from my life now. Her silence was louder than any apology would have been. But her absence didn't sting. It was a gift. Because the truth is, I didn't need her to fall for me to rise. I didn't need Silvera to burn to prove I'd been fire all along. I just needed to walk away and remember who I was before I started shrinking to fit her spotlight. I took a final sip of wine and looked out at the stars peeking through the dark. Then I picked up my phone and opened a blank note. Reminder to self. Leadership isn't loud. Dignity doesn't beg. Loyalty, when abused, becomes clarity. Trust will follow the person, not the brand. The best payback is peace. I closed the phone, set it on the table, and turned off the lights. Tomorrow would come, and I was ready.